All right, so we are on page 122, chapter 9. And again, the way we do this, at least right now, while we're doing these recordings, we're not going to ask for any input from the audience per se, right? But at the end of the meeting, we usually leave about 10, 15 minutes where I'll stop the recording and then we'll do that. We'll give a Q&A time. But again, once we're done with the recordings, we will go into our normal format, which will have more involvement of other people. So anyways, 122, the family afterward. At the top here, well, let's just put this in context where we're at in the book. The book is broken down again into 11 chapters. There's 11 numbered chapters if you look at the table of contents. In 1939, when the first edition was printed, the first printing of the first edition, the doctor's opinion was actually on page 1 in the Arabic numbers. Now they've moved it to where it's in the Roman numerals. But that information is so vitally important, I still look at it as a chapter. So in my mind, we actually have 12 chapters here. Now, out of these 12 chapters, you know, I always used to look at this when I first started studying this, like, well, we got 12 chapters, so we got 12 steps, so kind of got an idea how this is going to be outlined, right? That's not how it's outlined. It's not one step per chapter. That's not how they've done this. And you're going to see there's a lot more information contained in certain steps than others. For instance, when we got into chapter 6, into action, that one chapter covered 7 steps, just in one chapter. And now what we're finding now in these back chapters, when you got working with others, right? Chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 5 of 12 chapters, about 42% of this book is about one thing. It's about working with other people and how to do it. So don't let anybody tell you like, well, I'm not sure exactly how you work with other people or how you sponsor people. You've got almost half of this book giving us very clear. Have we not already seen clear-cut direction just in the last chapter to wives, to some of you that have been here? That's not just to wives. And in fact, it's not just to those tied by blood or affection to the alcoholic, which is what they say in there. But if you look at it from a perspective as a mentor or a sponsor, I guess, if you will, you've seen a lot of clear-cut directions of how to deal with the family because we've learned already in those last 2 chapters that we work with the family members as well. And when we're working with them, we need to know what they need to know. We need to know what we need to teach them, like as if that one of the most important things we've seen repeated over and over when they're talking to a wife, but anybody tied by blood or affection. But what's the first thing they said? Don't get angry. Don't get angry no matter what he says or does. And I always smirk when I see that because I think, how are you going to be able to really get that one across, right? To this person who has totally devastated your life, possibly the lives of your children, or even if it's, you know, you're a parent, just we devastate lives. And we're going to tell them, well, no matter what he does from now on, don't get angry. Okay. Well, you better be pretty prepared to back that up with information out of this book as to why that is and what the danger is in that. And we've covered that. So there are very clear-cut directions that we need to be studying these chapters as well, because there's very good information in here. So anyhow, that's where we're at in chapter 9 now, the family afterwards. It says, our women folk have suggested certain attitudes a wife may take with a husband who is recovering. This is one of the only times you see that word in this book. Very, very few times do you see this word recovering. Okay. This is obviously somebody who has not recovered, right? And we've already read in the Romans, how many times have we read? What is Alcoholics Anonymous? You guys remember that from the title page? The story of how lots and lots of people have recovered. I'm going to show you how they recovered. These are people who are recovering. That means at minimum, they haven't made it through step 9 yet. Because we found, again, I'm not going to back up, but we found when we got into step 9, by that time you will have recovered, if not sooner than them. So these are people who are not quite there yet. So we're talking about people who are new in recovery that are still recovering, but not recovered yet. Perhaps they created the impression that he is to be wrapped in cotton wool and placed on a pedestal. Successful readjustment means the opposite. All members of the family should meet upon common ground of tolerance, understanding, and love. Now, I would underline this. This involves a process of deflation for everyone, a process of deflation. Now, if we back up to very early on in the book on page 14, we read about this process of deflation they're talking about. The first paragraph, first full paragraph on page 14 says, simple but not easy. And they're talking about our program of recovery. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness, deflation. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. This now they're saying not just for the alcoholic, this is for the whole family. That is our process of deflation, the destruction of self-centeredness. And how do we go through how do we go through getting rid of self-centeredness, this destruction of self-centeredness? Well, that's what these steps all the way through 9 are for. It's not for us to stop drinking. It's to destroy selfishness, self-centeredness that we learned is the root of our troubles. And we learned in the last chapter, that's the root of their troubles too. Because alcoholics and addicts are not the only ones afflicted with selfishness and self-centeredness. We've learned that all humans are afflicted with this. So this deflation, so that we can carry this attitude of having this common ground of tolerance, understanding, and love, it's going to involve this process of deflation. And notice this again on page 14 when they talk about a price had to be paid amid the destruction of self-centeredness and turning everything over to the Father of light. This isn't Bill's story. And this is Bill's experience when he did this, when he went through this process of deflation. He goes on saying, these were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity as I have never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. You can go on reading this. This is Bill's spiritual experience that they're explaining. This is the process of deflation that brings about the spiritual experience. So it's not just alcoholics that can have it. What does it do for us? It alleviates the insanity that precedes the first drink, the mental illness that we have, the insanity. But for them, well, we read in Forward to First Edition, the last sentence said, our way of living has its advantages for all, has its advantages for everyone. So while it's an advantageous way of living for everybody, for us, it's necessary, it's vital. You guys remember what vital means? Definition, necessary for life. That's what it is for us. Okay, the alcoholic, his wife, his children, his in-laws, each one is likely to have fixed ideas. Fixed ideas, we've learned about those before too. These are formed from prejudice. And I don't remember the full definition of prejudice, so I still have to go back and look at this. But a prejudice is an adverse opinion or leaning formed without just grounds or before having sufficient knowledge. I don't want to hear about that. I just know, right? Prejudice, fixed ideas. We're all likely to have them. And we have to change these. In fact, didn't we learn from Roland Hazard? This is well before Bill was around. So in the early 1920s, Roland Hazard was the one who went to Dr. Jung and learned about this illness and the solution. And he said that every once in a while, here and there, over the course of history, alcoholics have had what are called, he says, spiritual experiences. Doesn't know how they work, doesn't know how to make them happen, and they only happen every once in a great while, but that's about your only hope, right? Was to have a spirit. But he explains what it looks like. He says it's ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of these men's minds, that are suddenly cast aside, and a new set of conceptions and motives dominate them. So a whole completely revolutionary 180 degrees with our ideas, our emotions, and our attitudes. Fixed ideas cast aside. Now, before most of us are willing to cast aside our fixed ideas, like, don't tell me I can't run my own life. I mean, maybe I'm powerless over alcohol. It's kind of hard to deny that when I just went to jail and my wife threw me out. It's hard to deny that, but talking about my life unmanageable, is my life really unmanageable by me? Like, what if I quit drinking? Would my life now be manageable by me? Okay. That's what we need to gather an understanding of, because the answer we've learned starting from step 3 is no. In fact, the first requirement for step 3 was that the requirement is that we be convinced that any life, even non-alcoholics life, any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. That's what we need to be convinced of. And sometimes that's a harder thing to get a newcomer to choke down than the whole alcohol problem that I can't control that. You know, we get beaten down pretty good by that. But before we're going to throw out these fixed ideas and live a new way of life, again, these steps through 9 we've learned, 1 through 9, we do one time. Nowhere in this book does it say we repeat them. In 10, 11, we're doing 4 through 9 every single day. So there'd be no reason to go back to do them. In step 12 is working with others and carrying this message. Those three steps are the AA way of living. That's how, before we are going to adopt a new way of living, at least I can tell you for me and most anybody I've ever worked with, it's one thing to sign up to go through step 9. Okay, how long is this going to take? Say 5 months, and then I can be done. I can graduate and be done with this. No, this is a way of living that's going to continue for a lifetime. Because while we do recover, not to mean be cured, if you guys remember the definition of recovery, is simply to be returned to a normal state of health after an illness. We can go back to that state again. The alcoholic insanity can return if we get shut off from the sunlight of the spirit. And how do we do that? Well, just start living life on self-will again. Just start doing that again. And then our life starts becoming unmanageable. And then you know what happens? We go back to the doctor's opinion. We start getting a little restless, irritable, and discontent. And we start thinking about that ease and comfort that we're going to get from a few drinks. And we're going to say, oh, no, no, no. I've been sober 5 years. I've been sober 10 years. I ain't doing that. And then you keep living life on self-will, and you'll get more and more miserable if you're an alcoholic. And soon enough will come the time where I'm not going to think one thing about those consequences, because I'm going to need that sense of ease and comfort so bad I'm going to pick it up. And that's what they say is wrong with us mentally. That's the reason we pick up that first drink over and over and over, because at certain times it differentiates alcoholics from anybody else. At certain times, we will not reflect on those consequences. Not all the time, but at certain times. So we don't want to go back to that. So now we got the whole family here that's sick in self, if you will, as well as the alcoholic who is trying to recover. So there's going to be a whole, while everybody's trying to get rid of these fixed ideas and getting new ideas, do you think that's going to be a massive amount of change for everybody to take on? I mean, I can just tell you from my own experience, within a year, I didn't even recognize my wife. This was a totally different person. Now, she didn't do any of this stuff. And not to say if she did, it'd be different. But what I can tell you is that I changed so much that her opinion and that, she didn't even know how to deal with me anymore. She didn't know how to take on a person who was patient and tolerant, because that wasn't me. Didn't know how to push, didn't know me. And therefore, I didn't know her. And it just changed the dynamics. And what we're going to learn about here is that can be a very, very difficult thing to navigate through, right? All right. So fixed ideas about the family's attitude towards himself or herself. Each is interested in having in his or her own wishes respected. We find the more one member, and underline this, we find the more one member of the family demands that the others concede to him, the more resentful the others become. We already know resentment is the number one offender that kills more of us than anything, especially somebody recovering. So this is going to make for discord and unhappiness, i.e., restless, irritable, and discontentedness. And why? Is it not because each wants to play the lead? Is not each trying to arrange the family show to his liking? And read on page 73 about the actor, right? How we try to arrange the show just to get everybody. If everybody did it the way that I tell you in do your place and do what I need you to do, everybody'd be happy. And we're all trying to do that and impress our will upon other people, and it always blows up. That's why. Is he not unconsciously trying to see what he can take from the family life rather than give? Would underline this. Cessation from drinking. Do you know what that means? You know, one word that you can break down cessation from drinking? That means that exactly. See, Lou heard me there. That means sober, which sober by definition is not drunk. So being sober is but one step away from a highly strained and abnormal condition. That means if you're not recovered and you're only sober, like for even a lot of years, like I was, like over a couple of decades sober, but not recovered, you are still one step away from a highly strained abnormal condition. In fact, on page 19, it said that elimination of drinking, sober, is but a beginning. And if you're sober for 10 years and not recovered, you know, I look at that, you've made a really long beginning, but you're still in the beginning and still one step away from that's why you may see, you know, I used to hear people say, when you get a sponsor, make sure you got at least 5 years. I don't know where this stuff came from, but it gets repeated so often that people believe it to be true and they just keep repeating it. I have met since then people 5, 10, 15, 20 years, including myself, sober for that period of time. You want to know what to look for in a sponsor? It's not even what he knows about in this book or how, certainly not how long he's been sober. You want to know if that might be a good person to work with? If he's completely changed his way of living, look at the way he treats his spouse or her kids, people closest to him, because that's what we have the biggest problem. And we got 2 chapters here just on that. Look at the way they treat them. And more, do they seem happy? Does the family seem to be happy? Look at that. Look at these things. Because that doesn't just happen, right? My life managed by me is unmanageable. If God is managing my life's going to get straightened out. And that's what matters. That's how you're going to know if they're recovered or not. Okay? So cessation of drinking, sober. A doctor said to us, years of living with an alcoholic is almost sure to make any wife or child neurotic. The entire family, I would underline, is to some extent ill. Let families realize as they start their journey that all will not be fair weather. Each in his turn may be footsore and may struggle. There will be alluring shortcuts and bypaths down which we may wander and lose their way. Alluring shortcuts. One of the biggest shortcuts I've learned about in this book is when a guy or a gal gets through that step 9 and they start feeling those promises that we read about on page 83. And life starts feeling really, really good because that is written right in step 9. And you know what they say when they get done? Happens very too often. Go through all this work. Like 4th step, this deflation process, 4th and 5th step, and 9th step, going through and making these amends. And life starts feeling good. I ain't got, the next thing to do is what? Start living the way of life, which a bigger part of that is working with others. I ain't got time for that now. I got a family, I got a job, my life is together now, man. I just don't have time. I don't need to get that much well. I'm good right where I am. And they don't want to do anything more. And it's a big warning that they go through over and over in this. Those are alluring shortcuts. And I would say, I want to turn back to page 14 and look at this. Again, this is in Bill's story, very early on, page 14. Last paragraph. And I go actually down to the last sentence on page 14. Here's your alluring shortcut. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain, not the maybe, but the certain trials and low spots that lie ahead. And if he did not work, he would surely drink again. And if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. And with us, it is just like that. That is the prognosis that we have to concede. Not only do we need to concede that we're powerless over alcohol in the beginning, we need to concede that we're dead. If I do not, once I get the spiritual experience, if I fail to enlarge and perfect it, I'm dead because I'm not going to survive those low spots that are going to lie ahead. It's just not going to happen. That's what they're warning us about. Does that make sense? All right. Suppose we tell you some of the obstacles a family will meet. Suppose we suggest how they may be avoided, even converted to good use for others. The family of an alcoholic longs for the return of happiness and security. They remember when father was romantic, thoughtful, and successful. Today's life is measured against that of other years, and when it falls short, the family may be unhappy, right? If you look into that, you see a little selfishness and self-centeredness possibly in there. Family confidence in dad is rising high. The good old days will soon be back, they think. Sometimes they demand that dad bring them back instantly. God, they believe, almost owes this recompense on a long overdue account. But the head of the house has spent years pulling down the structures of business, romance, friendship, health. These things are now ruined or damaged. It'll take time to clear away the wreck, but underline this, though old buildings will eventually be replaced by finer ones, the new structures will take years to complete. Now, we have read elsewhere a couple of different points in the book where how long does it take to recover? They give us a little outline of it in a couple of spots. They say this can happen in a matter of months. You can recover within a matter of months. But rebuilding your life says here, that's going to take years. That's going to take years. Fathers, you think the families ought to know that? Yeah. Who's going to tell them that? It's a good thing for us to learn this so that we know what to tell them, what to teach them, what to show them in this book. That's the point they're putting it here. Father knows he is to blame. It may take him many seasons of hard work to restore financially, but he shouldn't be reproached. Perhaps he will never have much money again. And I would underline, but the Wise family will admire him for what he is trying to be rather than for what he is trying to get. Now and then the family will be plagued by specters from the past. For the drinking career of almost every alcoholic has been marked by escapades funny, humiliating, shameful, and tragic. The first impulse will be to bury these skeletons in the dark closet and padlock the door. The family may be possessed by the idea that underlying future happiness can be based only upon forgetfulness of the past. And we think that such a view underlying is self-centered and actually in direct conflict with the new way of living. Well, didn't we learn in those promises that we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on them? Will we not learn that they can become our greatest assets? Right? Henry Ford once made a remark to the effect that experience is a thing of supreme value in life. That is true only if one is willing to turn the past to good account. I would underline, we grow. And we learned somewhere back a couple of chapters in the book that for the alcoholic, our hope, our only hope, is the growth and maintenance of our spiritual condition. So pay attention to that. It is vital that we grow. So how do we grow? It tells us here, we grow by our willingness to, one, face errors, and two, to rectify errors and convert them into assets. That sounds like a must. That's what we must do. Not to regret it and not to push it down. We must convert it. We must be willing to face it and rectify it. The alcoholic's past thus becomes the principal asset of the family, and frequently, it is almost the only one. This painful past may be of infinite value to other families still struggling with their problem. Their problem? What is their problem? I think we learned that in the last chapter. I see a couple smirks out there. Their problem is the same as our problem. Selfishness, self-centeredness, right? We think, and I would underline this and highlight it if you got a highlighter with you, we think that each family which has been relieved owes something to those who have not. And when the occasion requires, each member of it should be only too willing to bring former mistakes, no matter how grievous, out of their hiding places. But underlying, showing others who suffer how we were given help is the very thing that makes life seem worthwhile to us now. Amen. 100%. See a lot of nods understanding that. You know, I speak often about when I was sober 16 years, right? So I think it's very important for people to understand who have been sober for a while. And I hear about them after the meeting often, been sober for a number of years and just ain't feeling it or just really miserable. We don't go to meetings and talk about it though. You know, when you're one of these guys, because we put such a high, at a lot of other meetings, we put this high level of confidence, okay, and respect into people depending on how long they've been sober. So, you know, you're 15 years, 20 years sober. You don't come into a meeting and sit down and everybody's looking for your wisdom and say, I thought about killing myself today. Anybody else have that happen? We don't do that, right? So what are we left to do? We bury it and we get sicker and sicker with it. And we wonder, what the hell's wrong with me? I shouldn't be this way. I've been sober so long. But that is being sick in self. That is part of being sick in self. We can die based on putting that away. So when I bring this out and talk about it, you know, that's the darkest point. That to me may be different. I'm just telling you my experience. That to me is darker than my last drink. What happened to my last drink that day where I put a gun to my head ready to blow my brains out. I had never been that close to death before in my life, just wanting to end it. Stark raving sober. That is the worst, darkest point in my life. And today I will tell you what they're saying here is true. That has been the greatest asset for me because I have mentioned that to several people who have since got well that had no idea. You know, I got a guy actually part of our Zoom meetings. We've got, what did I say, 4 or 5 different Zoom meetings now. And in those combined, we get over 100 people in them all combined. Okay, it started with me and him. And it started with him who had the exact same experience as me. And he was sober 30 years feeling the exact same thing that I felt and gravitated to this. And we started working together. And that's where this whole thing sprouted from. So it has become an immense asset not just for us, but for many other people as well. So know that, again, it is necessary to take those darkest, deepest secrets and bring them out to light because they can be the greatest asset for somebody else still suffering. Cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. Life or death. It is possible to dig up past misdeeds so they become a blight, a veritable plague. For example, we know of situations in which alcoholics or his wife, which the alcoholic or his wife have had love affairs. In the first flush of spiritual experience, they forgave each other and drew closer together. The miracle of reconciliation was at hand. Then, under one provocation or another, the aggrieved one would unearth the old affair and angrily cast its ashes about. A few of us have had these growing pains, and they hurt a great deal. Husbands and wives have sometimes been obliged to separate for a time until one, new perspective, and two, new victory over hurt pride could be won. Talk about clear-cut directions. You're working with a new person who's gone through that, and I tell you, I've dealt with this a lot, right? You don't give them advice. That's not what we do. We show them the directions in here. This is based on their experience of what works. They might need to separate for a time until they get new perspective and until victory over this hurt pride can be won. In most cases, the alcoholics survive this ordeal without relapse, but not always. So we think that the underlying, unless some good and useful purpose is to be served, past occurrences should not be discussed. We leave that in God's hands, right? And when we do, going back into God's hands on page 124, and the dark past being our greatest possession, the key to life and happiness, that's part of what Dr. Silkworth was talking about in the doctor's opinion, when he talked about this is the basis of this rapidly growing fellowship of this men and their families. This is the basis, right? It has taken these dark past accounts and bringing them to people who still suffer, whether they're alcoholic or whether they're those tied by blood or affection, whether they're families, and bringing it together and pass it on to them. That is what the fellowship grows out of. It grows out of our solution. The fellowship does not grow out of our illness, such as, well, I come to meetings because I got to be reminded what it was like when I was drinking. I got to be around other people just like me. There was the sad saps just like me, as drinkers and alcohol. No. We grow out of our solution and working together to help others. That is how AA grows. That's how AA works. We families of Alcoholics Anonymous keep few skeletons in the closet. Everyone knows about the other's alcoholic troubles. This is a condition which, in ordinary life, would produce untold grief. There might be scandalous gossip, laughter at the expense of other people, and a tendency to take advantage of intimate information. Among us, these are rare occurrences. We do talk about each other a great deal, but we almost invariably temper such talk by a spirit of love and tolerance. We just read about love and tolerance. Actually, didn't we read a long time ago, love and tolerance is our code? And over and over, love and tolerance, love and tolerance. Another principle we observe carefully is that, underline this, we do not relate intimate experiences of another person unless we are sure he would approve. So how would we do that? If I want to relate somebody else's experience, as I had just done, says here, I need to make sure they would approve. Well, how would I make sure that they would approve? Might want to ask them. Right? That's the best way to do it before we go talking about somebody else's experience. We find it better when possible to stick to our own stories. A man may criticize or laugh at himself, and it will affect others favorably, but criticism or ridicule coming from another often produces the contrary effect. Members of a family should watch such matters carefully, for one careless, inconsiderate remark has been known to raise the very devil. I would underline, we alcoholics are very sensitive people, right? Well, we have those OSUPs going on. We found on page 48. We're obstinate, sensitive. We have unreasoning prejudice. We're very sensitive people. It takes some of us a long time to outgrow that serious handicap. That's why we call them the OSUPs. It tells us that those are handicaps. That's what's going to stop us from growing. Many alcoholics are enthusiasts. They run to extremes. At the beginning of recovery, a man will take, as a rule, one of two directions. So this is their experience. They see new people as they become recovered. They're going to take one of two directions. He may either plunge into a frantic attempt to get on his feet in business, in order to get my money going, or he may be so enthralled by his new life that he talks or thinks of nothing else. You better get this spiritual experience or else, right? I need to sponsor 50 people, right? One way or the other. In either case, certain family problems will arise. And with these, we have had experience galore. We think it dangerous if he rushes headlong at his economic problem. And again, think of this. If you're mentoring somebody, when you're studying this and reading this, think of it from this perspective. You got a guy or a gal that's going through this. Here's your directions on how to deal with it, right? Because they're going to ask you, I'm trying to get my bills paid. I'm so far behind and she's throwing a fit over. What should I do? And our first inclination is, I'm going to give you advice because I'm your sponsor. No. Well, let's see what the book says. Let's turn over here to page 126, see what they say. They say they have experience galore, and this is what they found worked. How about that? It's the best thing that we can do. The family will be affected also, pleasant at first because they're getting on their feet financially. But as they feel their money troubles are about to be solved, then not so pleasantly as they find themselves being neglected because they ain't around. Dad may be tired at night and preoccupied by day. He may take small interest in the children and may show irritation. Restless, irritable, discontent. He may show irritation when reproved for his delinquencies. If not irritable, he may seem dull and boring, not gay and affectionate as a family would like him to be. Mother may complain of inattention. They are all disappointed and often let him feel it. Underline, beginning with such complaints, a barrier arises. That's why it's probably not wise to start with these complaints, because a barrier is going to rise. He is straining every nerve to make up for lost time. He is striving to recover fortune and reputation, feels he is doing very well. Sometimes mother and children, well, they don't think so. Having been neglected and misused in the past, they think father owes them more than they are getting. They want him to make a fuss over them. They expect him to give them the nice times they used to have before he drank so much and to show his contrition for what they suffered. But dad doesn't give freely of himself, and then resentments grow. We see in the earmarks here, restless irritation. Now we're getting into resentment. It's going to kill us. He becomes still less communicative. Sometimes he explodes over a trifle. The family is mystified. They criticize, pointing out how he's falling down on his spiritual program. Anybody ever had experience with that? Well, I'll tell you, I have. Good Lord, if I had experience with this. This sort of thing can be avoided. I wish somebody would have showed me that. Both father and the family are mistaken. Both are wrong, though each side may have some justification. It is of little use to argue and only make the impasse worse. I think that can be agreed upon, right? If we argue, we're getting nowhere. There's one common ground we have. The family must realize that dad, though marvelously improved, is still convalescing. See, he's still recovering, right? He's still adapting to this new way of life. They should be thankful he is sober and able to be of this world once more. Let them praise his progress. Let them remember that his drinking wrought all kinds of damage that may take long time to repair. If they sense these things, they will not take so seriously his periods of crankiness, depression, and apathy, which, underline, will disappear, that sounds like a promise, when there is tolerance, love, and spiritual understanding. The head of the house ought to remember that, it's the other side of the equation, the head of the house ought to remember that he is mainly to blame for what befell the home. He can scarcely square the account in his lifetime, but he must see the danger of over-concentration on financial success. Although financial recovery is on the way for many of us. We found we could not place money first for us. Highlight, underline, material well-being always followed spiritual progress. It never precedes it. Can it be any more clear-cut than that? Since the home has suffered more than anything else, it is well that a man exert himself there. He's not likely to get far in any direction if he fails to show unselfishness and love under his own roof. Another good thing to underline. He's not going to get far in any direction if he fails to show unselfishness and love under his own roof. I think we found on page 82, last paragraph, the alcoholic is like just to remind everybody what they mean by this unselfish habits. The alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted. Underlying selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. What keeps our home in turmoil? Selfish and inconsiderate habits, not drinking. Selfish and inconsiderate habits. Oh, here's another good sentence. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. We get that? We don't want any unthinkers here, right? Sobriety is not in and of itself enough. See, where was I at? So yeah, when we have, okay, all right, proceeded. Since the home has suffered more than anything else, it is well that a man exert himself there, unselfish and love under his own roof. We know there are difficult wives and families, do you think? But the man who is getting over alcoholism must remember he did much to make them so. So even if they do jump out and God dang it, yes, I've got a lot of guilt. There's a lot of guilt from a lot of things that I've done, and you've got a lot of right to say some of the things, but this one that you're saying, it's not true, and it's just you being a nag, and it's you, and it's you, and it's you, and it's not me, and I'm not going to take it, and that's how we do sometimes, right? But now it's telling us, you know what? We also need to take a step back, because we need to realize just what we learned in the beginning. They may be sick too in selfishness. As we're asking them to concede to us with love and compassion, we need to concede to them when they get sick in selfishness as well, right? It also told us one thing that we learned was to avoid arguments as if they're the plague, because we learn resentment is what's going to kill us. And this boils down to both sides of the family, and it boils down to one thing. When they say avoid it like the plague, what does that mean? If you're in a room and you know the plague's in, let's just talk about COVID. COVID's in the room. Avoid it. Get out of the room. If there's an argument going on, what does that mean? Sit there and stew and just start burning up? Get out of the room. You might have to leave for a while. Avoid it like the plague, because that's what's going to be what kills us. With that, I think we'll stop right there for the day. We stopped at the last paragraph of 127.